Hey everyone, welcome to Neighbor Science, the only podcast about political economy and anime. I'm Ryan Salisbury, and today we are here to decide whether Marx and Engels or Bickler and Nitzan would win in a fight. And to help me decide that, I have a friend of the show, Corey. How you doing, Corey?
I'm doing all right.
So Corey has been reading Capitalist Power, which we are very familiar with on the show, and he's been talking to us about it in our group DM on the subject, and so I thought it would be fun to bring him on and talk about Capitalist Power as well as Capital, which I am reading. So I wanted to start with Capitalist Power. Yeah, what have you read so far in Capitalist Power? How far are you in the book?
So I just finished part one. Finishing with the chapter, I think it's 4, Deflections of Power.
So part one is the critique of other frameworks part, right?
Yes, I think. Hold on, let me look in the.
I'll actually run and grab my copy too.
Yeah, it's Dilemmas of Political Economy. So yeah, it's a critique of other forms of political economy.
Cool. So what do you think so far?
I like it a lot. Kind of previewing a question that you're going to ask me later. I think a lot of its criticisms of like Marxism and Marx are pretty apt. I have some disagreements with some of the stuff that they say, but it's less about like their takes on Marxism and more like kind of like their argumentation style and like maybe some methodological stuff. I don't know. I might be using that word wrong.
Okay. I mean, we can elaborate on that right away if you want.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's just, yeah. So I'm going to read what I wrote for like my notes on this.
Sure.
Just to help me organize my thoughts. I have really bad ADHD and like reading this book is very difficult for me, but like it's also fun because it's like difficult and like it forces me to kind of like learn new things, new coping strategies and stuff. Anyways, that's a little bit about me. But what I wrote was I think they're good. So like I think their critiques of like Marx and Marxism are good. But I'm less interested in whether they're like fair or correct or anything, and more interested in like the fact that it creates a new discourse with Marxists. Because like I think I'm more critical of Marxism in some ways than they are, and less critical of Marxism in some ways than they are. And my main problem is like I think that Marxism as an ideology is like really suffering under its own historical baggage.
Uh-huh.
And there's a lot of effort from Marxists to like force some like new phenomenon or some historical phenomenon into being like anodyne with Marxian analysis rather than like possibly trying to understand it in a new way. Like maybe Marxian analysis is not enough and that's okay. And like just playing around with new analytical frameworks and new like methodology. Like I'm an anarchist, so I'm already like coming from this in a different perspective, maybe even than they are. But I think like the fact that it creates new ways of dialoguing with Marxists and Marxism is like the thing that I find most compelling about it.
Yeah, I think you touched on one of the issues that I've had with trying to talk to people about it, which is most people, if they are, interested in political economy and they're not like right wingers, basically, they're usually Marxists. And anytime I bring up something from Capitalist Power that's like new, like differential analysis or centering finance, describing capital as finance, or the importance of mergers and acquisitions and inflation, their instinct is always to say, "Oh, well, Marx actually talked about that, so it's not new."
Which, like, is true. Maybe he did, but he talked about it in a different way.
And it usually actually isn't.
Yeah.
Because if he talked about it, then they wouldn't have anything to write about.
Exactly. The other thing that I think is fun about the way that they fun describing political economy is fun. That they come at this is like they show how much like Marxist economics is still tied to a lot of like classical and neoclassical like analysis, and that sometimes it's just like maybe slight tweaks on it.
Mm-hmm.
And this might be like a really petty way to like describe my feelings on it, but if the point of philosophy isn't to interpret the world but change it, like Marx, you could have changed a lot more.
Yeah, I will actually be touching on that when we get to the capital part.
Okay.
But yeah, I also have the same issue with Marx. He really accepts the framing of the economists of his day quite a lot, and it bothers the shit out of me.
Yeah.
Especially because me personally, I would call myself like an economic nihilist, maybe.
Yeah.
Because I just think that just about every single thing that economists say is 100% bullshit, and they basically want to create a narrative where the economy is like a magic machine that, you know, is like the most perfect optimal thing that has ever been built, and there's no way to do anything better than the economy.
Right. It's like a black box where like production inputs on one end and like proper like distribution on the other end. It's like you put the stuff in one side and then the other side, we're good.
Yeah, it's like it goes through this cosmic realm where, you know, just magic happens, and instead of it being like flawed humans making conscious choices, it's like some otherworldly force that turns out, I don't know, just like optimal outcomes. It's just insane. Right. And I think Marx takes that framing quite a bit, but anyway, we're talking about capitalist power, so we kind of went through all of the questions at once.
Yeah. Well, so like I did mention that like I consider myself an anarchist, and like my relationship with like Marxism and Marxists is I describe it as like I dislike Marxists, but I mostly like Marx, despite like, with the exception of some of the things that like Bickler and Nitzan bring up, and like my own kind of like ideological background and influences are I'm a big fan of Bookchin. Otherwise I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
But I also really like Freddie Perlman. And
I've never heard of Freddie Perlman.
Okay. Freddie Perlman's cool. He wrote Against History, Against Leviathan, which
I've heard that title.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that book to everybody. It's very weird, and like you have to approach it like in a very like I don't know how to describe it. It's a very weird book, and a lot of people hate it and a lot of people like it.
Okay.
But his shorter stuff that I highly, highly recommend is The Continuing Appeal of Nationalism, which is like kind of showing how left nationalism is garbage and leads to like bad choices.
Sounds good to me.
Huh?
I said that sounds good to me.
Oh yeah, no, it's really, really good, and he's a very like snarky writer. He's very fun to read. And then the other one is The Reproduction of Everyday Life, or it's something like that, which is just about kind of how the gist of it is like if you live in a totalizing system like capitalism, you end up reproducing the conditions for capitalism just in your everyday life, just in the way that you go about things. And so like it's simultaneously like a critique of individualism and like a defense of it. You know what I mean? Because it's like you can't make individual decisions that like confront capitalism, but the individual decisions that you make have an effect on it. And you have to kind of consider like what things you have to do in order to subvert it on an individual level and on a like collective level.
Gotcha.
It's very cool. I like the way that he like thinks and writes. His he also says that a lot of people call him like an anarchist or a Marxist, and he's like the only ist I am is a cellist.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, he's cool.
And then so you also have Foucault down here.
Oh yeah, Foucault, Camus, and Paul Feyerabend, who like aren't like ideological. They're more just straight up philosophy, but there's like a lot of overlap. I like philosophy of science a lot too.
Gotcha.
Which we will probably get into a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. So I guess one of the big things I was just looking through the chapter headings to refresh my memory a little bit. One of the big things in the early part of the book is the critique of the split between politics and economics, which I think is a really important part of the book. And also, you know, one of the ideological framings that Marx accepts, which for him is called base and superstructure, which I still never know which is which. You know, every time someone mentions base and superstructure, I have to look up which one is supposed to be like the state and which one is supposed to be the economy, according to him. So I guess it's superstructure is the government and the base is the economy. But
I don't think that's how he really like conceptualizes it from my understanding.
it
Like
says base people's relations to production, and then superstructure is everything not to do with production.
Oh, okay. Maybe I was
That's what
wrong.
That's what all the graphics I'm seeing. That's how I looked it up. I just image searched it. That's what all the graphics are saying now is yeah. But yeah, I don't understand that framing, why it's necessary, and I think it's bad. And I'm glad that Bickler and Nitzan critique that in their book.
Yes. Yeah. I really like how they point out that like with liberals and classical economics, it's separate. Like the economy and politics are just two separate things, and you can do politics without economy, and you can do economics without politics, which like from my like limited political experience just flat out seems like bullshit.
Yeah.
So I'm already sympathetic there, but then like when they describe like the Marxist conception, which is like he separates it and he like distinguishes it, but tries to make the argument that they're like connected or something.
Uh-huh.
And even then that's silly because politics and economics are the same thing. You can't do one without doing the other. And at least today, maybe in the past, I don't want to like make that claim, but and I think that they make a compelling argument that it's still the case for like when Marx was writing, but I don't know if I fully agree with them, and I haven't really thought about why.
One of the things I'm noticing I'm looking at like a bunch of different ones of these graphics. Like in the superstructure, there's a lot of stuff that would be considered part of the economy as well, like art, culture, media,
right,
science, education, religion. I guess would be sort of outside of it, but it's really not. And you know, like a big issue with trying to separate these things is they obviously interact in reality, and so you have to like. It basically becomes like a self-justifying like ideology where, you know, if you're a liberal, you believe that politics and economics are separate, and if when they interact, it's like, oh, that's money in politics, that's bad. That's corruption,
Right.
that's bad. That's interference in the market. That's market distortions. They have like all of these terms to describe like ordinary interactions between the government and the market that it creates, and so it just becomes a big confused mess
Right.
with a lot of moralizing involved.
Yeah, and one thing I find interesting about this is like, and granted, I think Marx kind of goes into this, but I can't remember. Making art, like if you're part of the base, because even looking at this image, it says that lumpenproletariat and proletariat and the labor aristocracy and the petite bourgeoisie and the bourgeoisie are part of the base. But if you make art as a part of the base, does it automatically like become part of the superstructure? Or is it representational of the superstructure? Like, is it actually possible to make subversive art?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like with this particular like conceptualization of it, I'm not sure that it's possible. And one of the things that Bickler and Nitzan point out, which I know is later in the book than where I've read, but I've kind of like picked up bits and pieces from all over the place, is like the act of sabotage and creating like these like kind of arbitrary middlemen between in production lines and like between business and industry.
Right.
And that's happened with art. Like I have a bunch of people and I have a bunch of friends in bands who like were promoting the fact that like Bandcamp was waiving all of their fees for yesterday. And it's like, what if Bandcamp didn't exist and we just had like a platform to share music and also to self-advertise as a band to like recoup some of the costs of creating music as a hobby?
Yeah.
Because most of the friends and bands that I know are doing it as like a hobby and a side hustle. You know what I mean? Like it's not their full-time job. One thing that they talk about kind of at the end of chapter 4 is really teasing apart the whole public-private distinction, which I think you've talked about in another show.
Mm-hmm.
Just reading, so on page 62, they're talking about Ellen Meekson's Wood. And they say, like, according to Ellen Meekson's Wood, capital is the privatization of politics insofar as it gives private owners the authority to organize production. Meekson accepts the existence of the economy, complete with Marx's laws of capitalist development, etc. The novelty is that the boundaries of your economy are not rigid, but supple. But then they go, Meekson's Wood is right to argue that capital is the privatization of politics, but the public-private distinction is not the same as the distinction between economics and politics. And since capital is not an economic entity, the fact that it privatizes power tells us nothing about the relationship between the economic and the political. And what I liked about that is, like, it really kind of exposes how we use public is not, like, does not mean state or political power if the state is run by private interests, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I didn't really have anything else to say about that, but I thought that was like a very appropriate thing attached to their larger like criticism of the separation of economics and politics.
Yeah, another thing that I wanted to bring up earlier that I just remembered was the whole corruption thing. I think if you like, corruption is like a big thing that is used to get people out of power that like the overall ruling class doesn't like, because
Yes.
every single one of them are thoroughly corrupt as far as that word is defined. Like especially in the current election in the U.S., both
Right.
candidates are thoroughly corrupt by any sense of the word.
Biden Biden comes from like the credit card capital of the country.
Yeah.
And you cannot tell me that credit card companies are not inherently corrupt. Like the whole nature of like the way that credit is given and financially recouped is absolutely awful.
Yeah, and like his fucking son just getting random like jobs on boards of directors.
Right.
I mean, that's how the ruling class just works in general.
Right.
But according to the frame where politics and economics are supposed to be separate, because, you know, if you let them work together, then bad stuff happens. That is corruption. But of course, that's just how it always works, because, you know, the government creates the economy and they create all the rules of the economy. They give it all of the money that it uses. And so obviously they have to like choose who gets it. And, you know, like it's just impossible for them to not interact like constantly. But
well, the state like gives them the money that they use, but also legitimizes the like other forms of money. If I'm trying to remember like the way that you talked about this before, like
like endogenous money.
Do what?
Like endogenous money, credit money.
Yeah. It legitimizes that sort of money supply too. So like, you have like the legitimizing aspects of like the structure of the state, and then you have like the fact that the state does the same thing.
Yeah, and then, you know, of course, like nobody really pays attention to the everyday corruption that's at, you know, every level of government. Just about every single politician, except for like, you know, the pure-hearted people like Bernie Sanders or whatever, which are extremely rare. But then when they want to get like, you know, a socialist politician out of power in, you know, Latin America, they just point out the corruption that they're involved in, which is exactly like the corruption they're involved in. But then they say, oh, this person is, you know, an immoral person because, you know, they are skimming money from public spending just like I'm doing, except look the other way while I do it.
Right. I actually have like a relevant story from my hometown if this is like a good time to tell it.
I just want to finish my point real quick though.
Sure.
I think if you see that there's no real distinction between politics and economics, it kind of inoculates you against that. But yeah, go ahead.
So, I'm originally from I call my hometown basically Wilmington, North Carolina. And there was an article that just came out that said developer requesting Wilmington rezoning at Gordon and Market would lead to a 7,000% daily trip increase. And Wilmington, specifically, like the Market Street corridor, has a ton of traffic problems. And so, like, I was like, oh, man, that's really fucked up. Let me read this article. And I was reading through it. And it said the property owners include Robert N. Betuyos from New York, Nicholas Betuyos, Peter Sappho, and the Betuyos-Sappho recombination. And I saw that name Peter Sappho, and I looked him up. And apparently he died at the beginning of the year. And sure enough, one of his pallbearers at the funeral was Wilmington Mayor Bill Sappho. So isn't that interesting how, like, you know, this very obviously, like, problematic rezoning and possible construction project has managed to have something that would affect, like, the larger economics of Wilmington overlooked when that particular thing is something that the city can control. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like traffic and public transit is something that the city can control. But, you know, we just happen to scoot right past that one. Isn't that interesting?
It's funny, though, the traffic there, even in the areas where it's a problem, is like coming from the DC area, it's just like nothing. When I go to visit my parents, they're like, "Oh, how's the traffic?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah, but like that's
I'm
kind
sure
of another.
relative, it's probably pretty bad, huh?
Well, I mean, Wilmington's not a very big town.
Right.
And Market Street, like the big problem that they're running into is that Market Street is pretty much one of the oldest like main thoroughfares in the city,
Hmm.
and Wilmington, like most coastal southern towns, has a lot of like very old and beautiful trees. And granted, a lot of them are dying because of pollution and like poor like forestry stuff.
Hmm.
But a lot of those trees line Market Street. And so like for example, I don't know if I think it might have gotten cut down actually, but there was like this weird like spot just outside of downtown where there was this huge beautiful old oak tree, and like the road literally like swerved around it. Like again, like if you looked up if you looked up like Market Street and Kerr, just like southwest of that, you can probably see like where it is, but you know, that's for the listeners at home to do. We've got other stuff to talk about.
Oh yeah, there was also in North Carolina a few years ago that scandal with the governor. I think he owned shares in Duke Energy, and was
Yeah, McCrory,
got in trouble for the coal ash ponds. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's just how everything works, like everywhere, you know.
I was actually working in the North Carolina Department of Health when that happened, like in the like epidemiology and public health division, and like it was literally like the last few weeks that I was there, and then like my office mate was just like, oh man, this is a thing that's happening and now I have to work on it. And like as I was just working there temporarily, and as my contract was ending, I have less work to do. So I just started going around talking to like some of the people there. And one of the guys who was working there, who like brilliant dude, like we talk about like just different public health stuff, and he was very, very, very intelligent and very dedicated to his work. He spoke out against that exact thing and got fired for it.
Wow.
Like, yeah, Pat McCrory, the Pat McCrory administration pressured the department to fire him.
Yeah. Oh. So I guess our conclusion for that section is just corruption is fine. Either you think the state is bad, or you should think corruption is fine, because that's how it works.
Right.
You have something about Jurassic Park. What was that about? I'm interested in that.
Oh, that whole thing was more talking about like my kind of like ideological development, and Jurassic Park is kind of how, you know, even like when I was 8 years old, when I first read the book and had no idea what the hell I was reading, was like my first exposure to like a kind of anti-consumerism critique of science. Because like I don't know what Michael Crichton's ideology is, but he's definitely a more has some more postmodern takes about like the role of science in like public society. And he got like wrecked over it for Airframe, which I think is about I think it's Airframe, it might be another one, where he was like kind of came out as a global warming skeptic, but it was more like, I think the way that we are looking at global warming is problematic, and kind of pointing towards like Al Gore's whole like carbon cap and trade stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or like carbon credits. But so like,
which is a form of climate change denial, really.
Right, exactly. And so like Jurassic Park in particular is like very, Ian Malcolm goes on that whole rant in the movie during the Chilean sea bass scene when they're all eating dinner, and he's like, you patented it and you sold it and blah 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 blah, and it's like, these are animals, these are living creatures, and you can't just like impose these creatures on an environment that is not made for them.
Yeah.
And that's where I first kind of like started and when I was older and like could better understand what he was talking about, that's when I kind of started thinking more critically about like, okay, we can't do this like I fucking love science attitude towards like science and public policy. Like science, the limits of science have to be what the limits of like domination are.
Right.
And so if you haven't read Jurassic Park, I highly recommend it. It is a wonderful, wonderful book.
Is it much different than the movie?
Yes. The movie is an action movie. Well, they kind of go into like more heady philosophical stuff, but the book is very much about like, you can't control everything. And when you think you can control everything is when things will go bad and people will die.
Interesting. Yeah, I know a lot of people like when the movie came out, a lot of my friends read the book and said it was good, but I've always been weird about reading books. Ironically, saying that on this episode, which is about 2 books.
No, it's a super easy read, and like Michael Crichton is a fun writer. Like he writes accessibly, I think.
Yeah. You just made me think of something else though. With the "I fucking love science" comment, one of the things that I really like about Capitalist Power is the willingness to critique like the basic assumptions of things. Yes. And I know you saw earlier this week the Twitter fight that I got in about math.
Yeah.
So someone, just to quickly recap, someone posted a tweet that was like, I saw something about anti-math theory and now I want to delete my account or some shit like that. I don't know. I don't remember what the exact tweet was, but I was like, I'm less averse to that than you might be, because I think a lot of math is like navel-gazing Christianized bullshit. Yep. And I just got absolutely dogpiled over it.
Yep.
Mainly by people who they like really just want to believe whatever math says.
Yep.
Because they asked me sort of like what I was talking about, but they weren't really interested in the answer, because what I said was like, well, there's certain areas of math that are like metaphysical searches for eternal truth, like deductive proofs is the one that I specifically called out. And the main reason I used that example is because I read a book called Euclid and Jesus by C.K. Raju, which is the entire book is about this exact subject, the Christianization of math, and how there is like fabricated history about it that basically has to do with like white supremacy and stuff. And these were all supposed to be like, communists and anarchists that were dogpiling me. And it's like, so you will accept that, your view of society has been shaped by the state, and you have gone through the period of questioning it and arrived to, Marx and or, Kropotkin or whatever. But you just reflexively are defending all of math for whatever reason.
And like, it is worth pointing out that Gregor Cantor, who was like the guy that first like developed a systematic understanding of mathematical infinity, was also a devout Christian and literally drove himself insane, because he was like, I'm a devout Christian, but like this, I can create this system where infinity actually makes sense, and I can work with like infinite values. And it's like, come on, like you can't say that it's not like a Christianized like concept when like the history of Gregor Cantor exists and you can read it.
Yeah, the funniest reply I thought was the person who was like, "Oh, I can just feel the Jesus radiating off of this," and it was laws of propositional logic, which might be the worst example they could have picked, because, I mean, first of all, they're just algebraic identities. It's just like, okay, you just did some algebra and found some interesting patterns in algebra, and then called them laws. And propositional logic is exactly one of those like navel-gazing Christianized things that are used in the search for metaphysical eternal truth. Like propositional logic is really not very useful at all. And the person who, like, the biggest historical figure for propositional logic was Leibniz, who was a huge Jesus freak. That was the whole reason that he was doing, he like thought of all that stuff, is because he thought he could like become closer to God by finding eternal truth through propositional logic.
To be fair, so full disclosure, I have a math degree. And I minored in philosophy, and like this was something that I like literally the last paper I wrote in college was about the development of like the axiomatic like system and like the whole like foundational crisis in the early 1900s. And to be fair, there's also Bertrand Russell, who is very big on propositional logic and is a like prototypical atheist. So like it's not, but he's also an atheist in like, if you actually read some of his stuff, he's an atheist in that way, in the way that like a lot of like formerly Christian atheists are, you know what I mean? Like their conception of atheism is to reject the Christian God and to conceive of God only in terms of the Christian God, or conceive of religion in general.
Yeah, there was actually another tweet that I saw like 2 weeks ago that got dogpiled way worse than mine. And they were saying that like a lot of atheists still have Christian views and are completely incapable of interrogating it because they don't know anything about other religions, and so they don't realize like what parts of their views are Christian, and like all of the like new atheist types absolutely just lost their shit.
Yes. Yeah, no, my partner's Jewish, and she was kind of the first person to point out like the kind of Christianization of like the new, or the like fundamental Christian values that are at the core of like the new atheist movement. And she's like a Jewish atheist, and or I think she's a Jewish atheist, I don't know. But she pointed out that like Jewish atheism, specifically Jewish atheism, which to like new atheists seems like a contradiction in terms, right? But like there's a long tradition within Judaism of disbelief in God, and like or criticism of God, and like from what she said and from what I've read of other like Jewish writers who have talked about this, is like this is kind of one of the like very like core things within Judaism, that like you can analyze these things, and like God is not this like external set of values that can't be like critiqued or modified. And like that kind of goes back to the propositional logic thing, which is like that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make a system of values that can't be critiqued, and until they find a contradiction, in which case it's totally fine to go back and like completely redo that. and I feel like that's kind of like, again, to kind of, I might be jumping ahead a little bit, but that's kind of like what the postmodernists were trying to do. They were trying to point out that like when you're setting yourself up to fail if you create these like rigid value systems that can't be critiqued until like there's some sort of crisis.
Yeah. One thing you got me thinking of too, which I know I'm not going to get this totally right because it's been so long since I read the book, but it's actually another thing from Euclid and Jesus, where he was talking about the differences in like metaphysics between Christianity and Islam, and there are Islamic conceptions of the world where basically God creates the world at every single moment of time, like creates it anew at every moment. And so that's a completely different way of perceiving reality than like the materialist view, which is a very Marxist thing, where God created the world a long time ago and it has just gone, everything is like a solid independent object and it's just gone on, since creation on its own.
Right. And maybe you'll come across some Christians who then say that, like, he interjects himself within the quote unquote real world to address something, or like because he feels like it. Yeah. Like,
but if I remember right, that's like one of the reasons people say inshallah, is because God creates the world at every moment. And so, God willing means literally like something may happen if God wills it to happen.
I love that. Inshallah, like, is one of my favorite non-English words because it literally means one of those things that like means anything. It's like so contextual. I love it.
Okay, so let's get into the postmodern stuff, because that is one of the things that I think both of us disagree with Bichler and Nitzan about.
Yes.
So do you want to start with that? Because you're a little bit more familiar, and I can just jump in.
So my big thing is that, like, I think some of their criticisms of, like, postism and postmodernism, I fucking hate postism, by the way. Like, it seems like just a way to not say postmodernism. But...
And to me, that would include, like, post-hardcore, post-rock.
Right. But, like, it feels like a lot of their criticisms of this are, like, weirdly personal. And, like they've gotten into arguments with postists, and they ended up
maybe they had one as their professor at some point.
Yeah. And it's like they have some whole thing about like shitting on decolonialism and like critical race theory and gender theory and shit like that. And it's like, my thing is that I don't think though any of those things are complete in the way that Marxism presents itself to be, or in the way that they're trying to make like CASP theory be, because I think they are right that in the mid 1900s the like Marxist academic left stopped talking about economics, and they started focusing on these social things, because like the social things were the things that you could get funding for. Like, duh, that's what's going to like crop up. And one of the arguments that I made in the group chat, let me see if I can find it real quick.
Shouts out to Daniel, who's always arguing with us about this stuff, by the way.
Daniel, I do love you, and I'm sorry for being so mean to you the other day. I've been kind of beating myself up over it.
Actually, since we're bringing him up, I'm actually going to plug his YouTube channel, Anarch. It's actually really good. He started a video series recently about how Marxist-Leninism is counter-revolutionary, and talks a lot about the history of the Russian Revolution, and it's really great. So check that out. Yes,
it's really, really good.
Anyway.
So one of the things that I brought up, and this kind of like maybe brushes up with like the criticisms of identity politics that a lot of like class reductionists talk about, is that like capitalism can still produce analyses of power so long as those power imbalances can be like operationalized for differential accumulation. And that's why you see all of these corporations and companies like trying to position themselves as like social justice, blah, 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 blah.
Woke
because
watching.
That is like, yeah. Because that's like a trend that a lot of people like agree with, kind of in a broad sense.
Mm-hmm.
When you actually talk to some feminists, they might be gender critical, like weird turfy people, but regardless, like they still recognize like at least LGB people as quote unquote valid.
And I think they'll eventually include trans people in that as well.
Yeah, no, I think that particular tendency is like becoming more and more marginalized for like their really just misanthropic attitude towards trans people.
Honestly, it's like it's a little weird that people act surprised about it, because it has already done this so many times before with like the counterculture movement, like the grunge movement, punk. You know, like everyone grew up with Hot Topic in the 90s and 2000s, selling like punk merchandise, and that's exactly the same thing as like capitalism doing like woke washing. It's the same exact sort of thing. It's taking something that is supposed to be anti-establishment, anti-hegemonic power, and capitalizing on it. And
right, it's recuperation, and and my whole thing is like, it's good that LGBT people are becoming more accepted within society, but in them becoming more accepted and even like achieving positions of power, like the in Virginia, there's a trans woman on
Danica Roem,
and like even the fact that we've had a number of like fairly popular female presidential candidates run and do pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
But like none of that matters if you can't actually expand the number of people and or expand the franchise of power, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like if the seats of power are finite and you're just taking one person and putting a different person in there, regardless of like gender identity, racial identity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that does not expand power.
Yeah, like in one sense, the class reductionists are correct.
Yeah,
in that one sense.
But then they overcorrect and say that like actually no identity politics stuff matters. And I think that's kind of in the same way that, or the same kind of thing that I have trouble with Bickler and Nitzan, is that like they recognize that all of these things lack a coherent economic analysis, which some of them honestly don't. Like if you look at like the Combahee Women's Collective thing where intersectionality came up, like they were a bunch of Marxist feminists. Like of course they consider economics, but though Bickler and Nitzan kind of point out some deficiencies there. Just because it lacks that component doesn't mean it doesn't have like a liberatory direction.
Yeah, my tendency is always to try and incorporate that into the economic analysis and not to just reject it because it lacks it.
Yeah. And like, so like actually going to the text.
I guess I would rather say class analysis. I don't like saying economic.
There was, I remember actually writing something in response to one of their like weird sneers against like postist stuff. For the typical postist, our historical view here is no more than Eurocentric arrogance, a remnant of the imperial mindset and its post-colonial successor. And I literally, like, in the margin I wrote, tedious bullshit, cry about it, you babies. Because, like, you can... and like this kind of goes back to a criticism of like a lot of postmodernist discourse, is that like, yes, something can be Eurocentric. Yes, something can be called out for its limited analytical scope, but that doesn't mean that the conclusions that it draws are not valid or cannot be like expanded in that direction. And I feel like they do that a lot with a lot of shit. Oh, the other footnote was at the bottom of page 34 at the very beginning of chapter 3. Wow,
I opened right to it.
The dominant postmodern fashion loves to reject this universal history, or should we rather say narrative, in favor of a much more politically correct present protestation. The postists not only decry the oppression of the East by the West, but also insist that the so-called Western scientific revolution, in fact, originated in the Orient. And my margin note was pretty sure no one claims this as strongly as implied here. Or if they do claim it, it's a purely rhetorical move to convince like deeply like people who have some like deeply held Western chauvinism to be like, please, for the love of God, consider something else.
Yeah. Well, and another thing is, and I can't believe I have been able to bring this up so much, but another thing in Euclid and Jesus was the fact that a lot of this Christianization of math stuff was, like, for example, we are taught in schools that calculus was invented whole cloth by Isaac Newton to explain orbits, right? Is that what they say? Or it was invented by some Western white scientists to explain planetary orbits, but really what happened
Newton
was
and Leibniz basically at the same time.
Yeah, it was taken from like the Islamic society, brought over to Europe, and in Europe there were laws by the Catholic Church that prevented Christians from citing Muslim sources. And so they just said they made it all up. And so we just take that as gospel that, we take that as gospel that, you know, oh yeah, they invented it. But it was really just like, yeah, they took all of this stuff from the actual, you know, like, advanced society at the time and used it for their own. And then they built on it.
Right. And I mean, like, algebra is an Arabic word.
Yeah.
It comes from al-jabra, which is like the work.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, and in that the math tweet, that was like the main example that I said was like very useful. It's like there are plenty of useful forms of math like algebra.
In philosophy of math, there are a lot of different tendencies on like how mathematical knowledge is like formed, created, discovered, whatever. I personally am like pretty taken with the quasi-empiricist argument, which is that like mathematics is informed by like empirical observation, but it's not limited by it. And because like all math is making up some fucking rules and seeing if they have predictive value. Yeah. That's all it is. And the fact that, like, we've been alive for so long and our brains are, like, hardwired for pattern recognition means that we're good at math for the most part.
Right.
So, philosophy of math stuff, talking about it with people who don't have, like, a background in math or, like, don't, like, use higher mathematics regularly is awful. I can't remember if I've said this already, but I think one of the things that I'm so irritated about with their like sneering dismissal of a lot of postmodern analysis is that postmodernism primarily concerns itself with power. Like that was Foucault's whole fucking thing.
Yeah.
It was always about like power dynamics and domination and so on and so forth.
Yeah, a lot of people, when I start talking about capitalist power, think that I'm talking about Foucault because they've never heard of CASP.
Yeah. And so, like, and I think part of the problem and part of the reason why they weren't looking at economics is, like, the institutional aspect of, like, you weren't going to get, like, academic funding if you were looking at, like, economic stuff that didn't, you know, prove the legitimacy of capitalism. But also the fact that, like, as kind of Bickler and Nitzan tease out, is that they kind of, like, Marxist economics has not had good predictive value for a long time. And so, like, a lot of...
What do you mean? The rate of profit is still falling. Look at this chart.
Yeah, rate of profit is still falling. That's why, you know...
That's why capitalism has collapsed, just like we predicted it would.
Yeah. But I think they gave up on it because, like, what else was there to do? You know, like you were working with like a faulty system seems like a stronger word than I want, but I know that it's totally fine here. You're working with a faulty system and not getting the results you want. Like, why would you continue fucking doing that unless you are a masochist like Kleiman or something? So like I think their criticism of like postmodernism's like movement away from economic analysis is appropriate and valid, but it fails to understand why that happened. And I think that their arguments and the way that they look at how power dynamics actually exist within like a capitalist economic system would be much more powerful if they incorporated some of those like more postmodern like social critiques.
Yeah, I think so too.
Like I wrote my footnote at the end of chapter 3 was like it was in response to the second to last chapter or second to last paragraph where it says the objective mechanical cosmology of the Newtonian and liberal revolution started to fracture. In its stead came an indecisive worldview of uncertainty, risk, and probability, of relative time/space, of an unsettling entanglement of particles, and of a rather hazy separation between observer and reality. These developments have been used to justify further movements away from the scientific universal principles of political economy. Vitalism, ethnic identity, and racism have all flourished in the name of cultural pluralism. Anti-scientists have challenged the so-called binary essentialism of Eurocentrism. And I responded to that with saying, these developments set the stage for breaking the intellectual power monopolies that they've already complained about within like the academy, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And the emphasis from postmodern anti-science rationality isn't about abandoning knowledge, but that knowledge isn't eternal, fixed, or independent of like everyday human experiences. And then the last thing I wrote was, these petty sneers ruin this text's readability.
I think that's a good segue into epistemological nihilism too.
Hell yeah.
And this is something that this is like the main thing we argue with Daniel about. I am a epistemological nihilist personally, and just to explain like my interpretation of what that is, it just means that, you know, all knowledge is flawed. The only thing that knowledge can really be based on is observation, which, you know, has biases, limits. You know, you don't always see or hear things correctly. You can interpret them incorrectly. You interpret them according to your existing worldview. And so there's no reason to think that anything that we think really is like unquestionable, that anything is absolutely correct and can never be disproven, or that anything has been proven 100% correct. What's your interpretation of it?
Basically the same, like the thing that my footnote that I just read. Shit, I can't remember what you just said. See, folks, this is what ADHD is like.
Like, I guess one of the big things for me, especially lately, is just not trusting academia very much, because
and
I mean, like you said, they have to get funding, and so any sort of knowledge that comes from academia is inherently biased by the needs and desires of the state, because you can't do research unless you get funding for it, because, you know, otherwise you would have to do it in your free time and work a full-time job doing something else. And so it's pretty rare that you're going to get knowledge that's actually like counter to the state's interests through academia.
Right. And if you do, like, it's going to be from an institution that does not necessarily guarantee you, like, economic viability.
Uh-huh.
But like, so speaking on the academia thing, on page 56, they quote Daniel Bell, and it's if the dominant figures of the past 100 years have been the entrepreneur, the businessman, and the industrial executive, the new men are the scientists, the mathematicians, the economists, and the engineers of the new intellectual technology. In the post-industrial society, production and business decisions will be subordinated to or will derive from other forces in society. The critical decisions regarding the growth of the economy and its balance will come from government, but they will be based on government sponsorship of research and development, of cost effectiveness, and cost-benefit analysis. The making of decisions, because of the intricately linked nature of their consequences, will have an increasingly technical nature. And, like, they say it right there. And, like, that's one of the big criticisms of, like, or that's, like, the postmodern criticism of, like, science and math, is that, like, because scientists, engineers, etc., are positioned as, like, the interpreters of an objective world, when you criticize, like, the divine objective truth that they have uncovered, it makes you look like a fucking crazy person or a criminal. And, you know, fortunately, we have some neat new state organs to deal with such people and get you back in line. You know what I mean? Like, the disciplining nature of school, fucking jail, etc., etc.
I just realized we're doing the intelligent version of question everything, man. Be a free thinker. Don't be such a sheep.
Well, like, I hate.
See, everyone else that says that kind of thing is dumb, but when I say that kind of thing, it's actually very smart.
Yes. Yeah. Same. Yeah, you know, it isn't it interesting that, like, because that kind of stuff came out in the 90s and 2000s, just after the fall of the Soviet Union and kind of like the end of Marxism, so to speak, that, like, because Marxism was no longer a threat, they had to, like, neuter and sloganize all of, like, the anarchist stuff, hence the punk scene, hence the grunge scene, hence, et cetera, et cetera. Isn't that interesting how when Marxism fails, they both turn on anarchism?
It's like when prophecy fails, but for leftists.
Yeah.
I haven't quite worked out how to make that into a joke, but that's the start of it. So, you know, put it together in your own head, I guess.
All right. I'll do this.
All right. So I think we need to move on to the capital section. We've been talking about capitalist power for quite a bit.
Yes.
So I have already talked about. I am pretty sure I've talked about chapter 1 and 2 on the show. So I'm currently I'm like most of the way through chapter 3, section 2, but section 1 is very long, so I'll just be talking about that. So I'm skipping chapter 2 because I barely took any notes on it and don't remember what I read really because it was so long ago. So chapter 3, section 1, he starts talking about money, which immediately pisses me off. So the first thing I have here is a quote. Throughout this work, I assumed that gold is the money commodity for the sake of simplicity.
Which isn't even true for, like, where was he living when he wrote Capital? He was in London, right?
I don't know. Any answer that I give is going to make me sound like an idiot for the rest of this section, so I'm just not going to say anything.
Regardless, if he was living in London, they used fucking shillings, which were silver.
So there was a period where they had sovereigns, the English sovereign, and that was a gold-based coin.
Okay.
But it's still, like, I don't want to get too much into commodity money because I want to do a whole episode about it. But calling money a commodity is just really, really wrong. Ignores how money came about and how it's used and created, both currently and historically. And then, yeah, he like for everything that I've read so far, he keeps talking about, trading stuff for gold and trading stuff for money like interchangeably, as if like people are paying for stuff with lumps of gold, which is pretty insane. But
Right.
so that's how he starts section 1, which primes me to not really want to take any of his advice, I guess. So he says, God, I just have so many quotes here that didn't really like highlight anything, but the first main function of gold is to supply commodities with the material for the expression of their values, or to represent their values as magnitudes of the same denomination, qualitatively equal and quantitatively comparable. It thus acts as a universal measure of value, and only through performing this function does gold, the specific equivalent commodity, become money. It is not money that renders commodities commensurable, quite the contrary.
So wait, Ryan, is he saying that in fact, if money is hold on.
So he's saying that money doesn't make things like measurable in prices. Commodities make themselves measurable in prices. I think that's what it's supposed to be saying.
Well, no, what I was going to say is that, okay, so if gold currency is the measure of value, and we measure, and therefore we measure value in currency, and currency informs prices, is he saying that value and price are the same thing?
So yes, I think he is saying that repeatedly through this whole section, but
the whole fucking book.
As you're alluding to, I got into a big Twitter fight about this as well with a bunch of Marxists, multiple times actually. The one with the two young Hegelians people, that's the most recent one, but. I've had so many Marxists tell me that value and price are not the same thing, and anyone who reads Capital that way is reading it absurdly wrong. And then, like in this most recent one, they quote all these passages to me that, like, I think back up exactly what I'm saying. The value is price, and it's just like unnecessary jargon that makes things overly confusing because of shared definitions between like exchange value, as they call it, and like value as in like the way that we value an object, like personal, like subjective value.
Right. And I think that's what's so absurd is that like if they're making the claim that there is this form of value that is not like determined by price, and that in fact the value of this thing is something else, then like and Bickler and Nitzan kind of go into this like, what is that value? How do you figure it out? How do you measure it? You fucking can't. Like that's the labor value that they're trying to talk about, and like you can't measure that except in price.
Yeah, so like this next passage I have here, he says, because all commodities as values are objectified human labor and therefore in themselves commensurable, their values can be communally measured in one and the same specific commodity, and this commodity can be converted into the common measure of their values, that is, into money.
Again, saying that prices and value are the same. assuming that prices are measured in units of money, which they are.
And like, first of all, I have such a hard time reading this stuff because I think it's the most confusingly written shit that I've read in like a very long time. I know I've said this on the show before, but please just write things in vulgar English so that normal people can understand them and don't have to spend like 10 minutes rereading a sentence to like figure out what the fuck it's saying. And don't use 20 appositives in one sentence. Just write short sentences. Or at least like just make them run on sentences. If you want to write a 50-word long sentence. Just make it a run-on sentence so that like you have at least separate thoughts instead of non-linearly interjecting ideas that weave through each other. It's not good writing. It's bad writing to do that. I don't know.
And kind of hearkening back to the whole like mathematics as a Christian like thing, like the way that we use language and like our grammar rules are completely fucking arbitrary.
Yeah.
Like just communicate the point that you think you're trying to make. Doesn't matter if it like breaks some quote unquote rules.
Yeah, it's
like,
fine. Just you don't even have to use punctuation. Who cares?
Like a lot of grammar rules were literally created in the early 1900s because there was a movement to make the English language as systematized as Latin, and that's why we have like octopi, despite it being a Greek word, having a Latin suffix. Or
yeah, that's one of those nerd things that I like. You know, I like when people try to correct me on that so I can correct them back. Yeah. It's octopuses, guys.
Octopodes, if you're trying to do the Greek one.
Yeah. But so anyway, like, okay, so there's a lot to deconstruct in this passage here. So in my notes here, I have, like, commodities as values are objectified human labor. Okay, but they're not really objectified. In reality, the labor component of a commodity is based on the wages of all the workers involved in bringing a commodity to market. And wages are power relations. The power relation inherent in determining a wage is why unionization raises wages, why more competitors for the same job lowers wages, because if they de-skill a job and more people can compete for the job, there's more likely to be someone who will be willing to offer to accept a lower wage for the same work. That's why competition works. So we're talking about power relations in determining wages. So like another thing that this contributes to is, labor being cheaper in other countries. The reason for that is, one, exchange rates, which I need to do an episode on that because I need to understand it better, and I think everyone else should understand it better. Yeah. It's not quite as simple as we think. But, also just like, lower unionization rates in other countries, and closed borders also lowers wages because of power relations as well.
Right. If you're creating a whole criminal underclass who need to work to survive but cannot do so quote unquote legitimately, then it's very easy to pay them shit wages when you could otherwise employ someone legitimately and be forced to pay like a living wage. There's actually, again, not to go on too much of a tangent, but I've been pushing this book to anybody who is interested in like radical Southern history. There's this wonderful book called Masterless Men. It's about the political economy of...
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah. The political economy of the South, and specifically focusing on... Because, like, there's a lot of stuff about, like, the political economy of, like, the slave labor system. Mm-hmm. But not everybody in the South was a slave. Not everybody in the South was a slave owner. And, in fact, there's a shit ton of people who were not only neither, but were also, like, de-skilled peasants, more or less. To kind of, like, put it in more of a Marxian framework. But even then, they didn't necessarily have land to own or work. A lot of times they had to like engage in like really oppressive sharecropping. Mm-hmm. But even then you can't compete against compulsory labor.
Yeah.
And so like her whole thing is talking about how like the slave economy depressed wages for anybody who wasn't a slave owner.
Right.
and a lot of like, and just talking about like what sort of work and living conditions those people had to deal with. And it's like the like simplest way I've been able to kind of differentiate it is that like there's the like slavery was like being beaten to death, and kind of the destitution of being a poor white in the South was like starving to death. Both result in death, both are easily preventable, and both like are because of the system of slavery.
Okay, so let's see. He talks about how, like, he sort of talks about how prices are defined. I don't have a passage quoted here for some reason, but he more or less says like two commodities values can be measured in proportion to one another. So it's like, I hate to use equations in audio format or at all really, but it's like XA equals YB. So like A and B are commodities and like X and Y are proportions. So he's saying that like they each have like this coefficient that determines like their proportion to each other in terms of labor. But like this is a thing that economists do a lot. They come up with this idea of how they think the economy could be represented, and then they just treat it as if it's true, and then move on from there, and just like try to test their assumptions, or try to test that against like other things, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah,
but in reality, a price is cost plus margin. So in reality, it would be like, you know, the amount of time that each worker spends working to bring that product to market, plus any costs like materials and rent and all that stuff that goes into that product, which on its own is really, really hard to measure, because if a company has a factory that produces like 1,000 different products, which is pretty fucking common, they pay like rent on that factory. And how do you break down the amount of rent that goes into an individual product?
Right.
And then they also have profit margins. So that's the easiest one to find, because they just decide what that is themselves.
And even just to add to that, like frequently a cost that is not considered is like the environmental cost of creating a product. Like that's one of the big criticisms of GDP, is that it doesn't account for the fact that like, sure, you can strip mine or you can blow off the top of a mountain to get to those resources, but like what did you lose by doing that?
Right. Yeah, I mean that's an issue with how prices work. I'm talking about like the stuff that you actually do account for. So like
right.
when a product is priced, these are the actual costs that go into it. Is like all of the labor and all of the costs of the product plus the profit margin, and it's all, somehow, the bean counters break down the costs and decide what the unit cost is and add a margin to that.
Right.
But so like the only component to a cost that doesn't have to do with power is time, which Marx does conceive of labor in terms of hours, but there's no single true amount of time that goes into producing a given product, which is why he has to do the like socially necessary labor time.
Right.
But all the rest is like clear power relations. So costs, those are negotiated between businesses. That's a power relation. Wages are a power relation. Profit margin, also a power relation. So that is like overwhelmingly what actually goes into a price. And so it's just really hard to read this stuff when he's talking about prices being based on labor, when that's so clearly not the case.
Right.
Um, okay. So yeah, this next passage in my notes, I just have "come the fuck on, man" before I quote it. He says, "A general rise in the prices of commodities can result either from a rise in their values, which happens when the value of money remains constant, or from a fall in the value of money, which happens when the values of commodities remain constant." So I think this is why Marxists also have a really bad understanding of inflation, is like this stuff appears a lot in this section, and I'm sure a lot in the rest of the book. So let's start with just the phrase value of money. The value of a dollar is $1. It always remains constant. It is, if we're talking about, like, if we're saying that prices are value, then money is the measure of value. So like, it can't do anything but remain constant. So a general rise in the prices of commodities can only ever result from a rise in the values of the commodities, if that's the term we're using. But
I'm looking at my wallet right now, and I have a 20. All of these. So I have a $2013 and a $2017. I'm assuming that the $2017 is worth less, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Because money back then bought more.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And it definitely doesn't have to do with like
arbitrary. Back in my day, a dollar used to cost a nickel.
Well, if I could buy a candy bar with $1 back then, but now I have to pay $1.50 today, then that means that all of the things that go into the cost of that candy bar definitely have different values now, right? I don't know. I'm just fucking
I know
bullshit.
I've mentioned this on the show, and there was also a tweet recently that was asking what your favorite Onion headline was, but my favorite Onion headline, which to me is evergreen, is "Markets in turmoil as the price of money skyrockets to $90 a dollar." And I feel that's pretty applicable here. Okay, so yeah, he continues with this stuff. So I'm already dreading reading this next passage. I hate to like be this like sneering about this book, but it really hasn't gotten any better to me. So he says, "Price is the money name of the labor objectified in a commodity. Hence, the expression of the equivalence of a commodity with the quantity of money whose name is that of that commodity's price is a tautology, just as the expression of the relative value of a commodity is an expression of the equivalence of two commodities." I'm not even sure how to... I should have taken more notes on what that actually meant. I'm sure I understood it like after reading it a few times, but now that I've read it, I have no idea what that's supposed to be saying.
Hold on. Price is the money name of the labor.
So if you're following along, this is page 9 of my notes.
No, I'm reading it again. Price is the money name of the labor objectified in a commodity. So, like, I guess he's using money name as like,
yeah. So he just said that value is objectified human labor, and then here he says price is the money name of the labor objectified in a commodity. So he's saying that price is value. What the fuck are people talking about? Where are they getting this price is not equal value stuff? I don't understand.
Because if they have to say that price and value are the same thing, it means abandoning the labor theory of value. It means that because you can arbitrarily set prices, like you can.
Yes.
I can resell my phone that I have in my hand for $50, and that means that a used phone costs $50. You know what I mean? So like,
Yeah, people have gotten very mad at me in the past for saying that prices are arbitrary, but they are. I'm sorry, they just are.
as another example, like I play guitar and I'm kind of a gear hound. And I look at like a lot of used pedals, like guitar pedals, to see what I can find. And a lot of time, and like as another example, there's a subreddit called Let's Trade Pedals, where it's just you trade pedals. Like someone has some pedals to offer, I have some pedals I'm trying to get rid of. They're the same ones, we trade. And it's always funny going through the calculus of like how to make a trade even there, because it's like what everybody does is they go on reverb.com, which is like basically musical instrument eBay, or specifically for guitar stuff, and they look at like recent sale prices for a thing. You kind of like make some value judgments on like what's the word, like condition, like is it good condition, is it in poor condition, et cetera, and then you just like compare the prices that you get from there to the prices that you get from what you're trying to trade. But even then, sometimes there are things that like you feel are undervalued. Like the reason why people do this is because they don't necessarily have actual money to purchase used pedals. So there was one pedal that I really, really wanted and I was really, really looking for, and I was willing to like get rid of like one of my more valuable ones in order to get it, because I couldn't find it because nobody was trading it. They were just selling it.
Okay.
And so like I quote unquote lost money /
So you
value.
sweeten the pot a little bit.
Yeah. And then ended up getting like I ended up getting like a cheap pedal that I actually ended up using because it's pretty cool, to sweeten the deal on their end. And it was literally just like, well, I have this thing and I don't really care about it. Here, you can have it. And they're a dime a dozen. So it's like, prices are arbitrary. Like, it's whatever people want to fucking pay for something or charge for it.
Yeah. Yesterday, Diane and I were watching this show Flea Market Flip. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
No.
So it's a show where they have two teams of two people each, and they send them to a flea market, and they have to buy some old junk for really cheap, and then they turn it into furniture, and then and spruce it up, and then they go back to the flea market and resell it. So it's basically like, and the main reason I bring this up is because flea markets versus like big box stores, just thinking about the differences in how prices work between those things are how I actually discovered the book Capitalist Power. Because, you know, in a flea market, you have two people with basically equal bargaining power. It's just two individuals. Either of them can walk away from the sale pretty much, you know, like nothing there is like so rare that the seller has all the power. So it's always like, you know, two people haggling for whatever the object is. Go ahead.
Or if there is something that is that rare, then the seller usually has other shit that they can sell, and they're not tied to selling this one rare expensive item. Yeah.
And in that show a lot, one of the negotiating tactics they use pretty often is like, you know, this thing is like really big and it's the end of the day. You don't want to load that back onto your truck, do you? So they'll get a lower price for that reason. But then like if you go to a big box store, everything just is the price that it is because the corporation has all of the power. So there's no negotiating the price. And so clearly prices are decided by bargaining power, and the person who has more bargaining power has more, you know, a greater ability to decide what the price is.
Right. I feel like there's an analogy to be made about like legibility, like the James C. Scott like legibility idea.
Probably, but I would have to think about it, and that would take too long right now. But basically, like anything where prices are supposed to be like objectified, like physical quantities, are just nonsense. Like, how is that supposed to work? Like if I go to a flea market and I offer fucking like $30 for a pair of rusty old wagon wheels that I'm going to turn into a table, how on fucking earth does that have anything to do with the amount of labor that went into it?
Right.
And I mean, I guess like the Marxist conception of this allows for some like amount of wiggle room around it, but like he basically says, I don't know if this will come up in the next passage that I'm going to quote. It's basically like sort of like the neoclassical idea of prices, where you have like an equilibrium that is, that represents like optimal allocation of supply and demand, and sometimes there's distortions that happen around it, but in the long run, on the the highest possible scale, it actually is this transformation of a physical objective quantity, or like the objectified version of what people want, and anything that doesn't match that is just like a minor temporary distortion, but like right. that's crazy. So yeah, again, I have here, I don't know how you could interpret this in any way other than LTV being an explanation of price. So this is a kind of a long one. He says, this is on page 196 of the Penguin Classics version. So he says, the magnitude of the value of a commodity therefore expresses a necessary relation to social labor time, which is inherent in the process by which its value is created. And I have this highlighted here. With the transformation of the value into the price, this necessary relation appears as the exchange ratio between a single commodity and the money commodity which exists outside it. This relation, however, may express both the magnitude of value of the commodity and the greater or lesser quantity of money for which it can be sold under the given circumstances. So that's the thing that I was just talking about. The like, it can be slightly distorted, but temporarily, and not on the average. The possibility, therefore, of a quantitative incongruity between price and magnitude of value, i.e., the possibility that the price may diverge from the magnitude of value, is inherent in the price form itself. This is not a defect, but on the contrary, it makes this form the adequate one for a mode of production whose laws can only assert themselves as blindly operating averages between constant irregularities. And again, this is exactly how neoclassicals talk about price. They say it is like a representation of like an objective or unbiased, at least, like quantity that is, represents something else, either our needs and wants or fucking whatever. And it fluctuates because humans are flawed, basically.
Right.
So how is this anything but price equals value? Yeah.
Looking at that last sentence, and I might be totally misinterpreting this because I actually haven't gotten to this section in Capitalist Power, but it makes this form the adequate one for a mode of production whose laws can only assert themselves as blindly operating averages between constant irregularities. Isn't that differential accumulation?
See, it's just so hard for me to interpret this language. I'm not sure.
Well, so maybe let's review what differential accumulation is.
Right. So, yeah, differential accumulation is capitalists can beat other capitalists at basically getting revenue at a certain rate. So, like, Pickler and Nitzan speculate that the rate of inflation is sort of the average rate of accumulation of capitalists. And so capitalists that increase their revenue at a rate higher than inflation, if they get returns higher than the rate of inflation, they are the winners in capitalism, and those that don't are the losers. And so differential accumulation is basically like being a winner, beating the average rate of accumulation, compared to other corporations or capitalists.
Right, but I don't know. I feel like there's something there. blindly operating averages between constant irregularities.
Yeah, I mean, I think the blindly operating averages thing is I think he's referring to socially necessary abstract labor time. Because that is an average that isn't necessarily, like, we can't necessarily quantify it exactly. And the constant irregularities, I think, are the, like, distortions. But I'm not sure because, like I said, I have a really hard time interpreting this writing. So I could still be wrong about, you know, the price equals value thing, but I don't think that I am because I just keep finding these sentences that agree with my interpretation of it, I think.
It almost seems like you actually don't have a hard time interpreting this, and you do have a hard time, like, making your interpretations anodyne with, like, Marxian dogma.
But I do still have to read these like, all these passages that I quote, I have to read them at least 3 times before they make sense to me. And in fact, I say that in the next sentence in my notes. I said, it's impossible to read this shit, but it seems pretty clear once you parse it. So, okay, I have two or three more passages here. So the next one is, the price form, however, is not only compatible with the possibility of a quantitative incongruity between magnitude of value and its own expression in money. So that's the distortion in price. But it may also harbor a qualitative contradiction with the result that price ceases altogether to express value, despite the fact that money is nothing but the value form of commodities.
And one thing, back on the last thing that this is actually related to is you were talking about how Marx kind of assumes the commodity theory of money.
Oh, he explicitly assumes that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're not there anymore. Like, after we got rid of the gold standard, we don't have a commodity theory of money. Like, it is not represented.
Yeah, the only people that believe in it is libertarians who think we need to go back to the gold standard.
Ron Paul is a Marxist.
He has a Marxian theory of money, yeah.
But yeah, like, this is, I think that is kind of like the underlying problem with a lot of this, is that, let's say labor theory of value is correct and, like, the CASP criticism of it is totally wrong. Even then, a lot of, like, Marx's arguments are operating with a theory of money that does not describe how money works today.
Yeah.
And, like, even if you like totally go whole hog into, like, modern monetary theory, you don't have to. But, like, money is imposed by fiat, and it's, like, kind of tied to, like, oil consumption, I think, or something. But it's not really, because you can just fucking print that shit.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really hard to like to even do that, because not only can the government print money, but so can banks now.
Yeah.
They can just create money with credit. And that's supposedly 99% of the money in circulation is actually bank credit money. So, yeah. Okay, so there's actually, like, part of this passage or this excerpt that seems like it might disagree with me. So it says, things which in and for themselves are not commodities, such as conscience, honor, etc., can be offered for sale by their holders and thus acquire the form of commodities through their price. Hence, a thing can, formally speaking, have a price without having a value. The expression of price is, in this case, imaginary, like certain quantities in mathematics. On the other hand, the imaginary price form may also conceal a real value relation, or one derived from it, as for instance the price of uncultivated land, which is without value because no human labor is objectified in it. So that's the only thing I think that I've really found so far that disagrees with my interpretation.
Yeah.
But
And
even then, it seems more like it's a false price.
yeah. Or, well, even then with like uncultivated land has value. Like, and we kind of got into this in the group chat talking about like what labor actually like indicates. Because like, if let's say I live in a rural area and I walk outside and there's a blackberry bush there, and I decide I'm just gonna pick these fucking blackberries and bring them home, and then
I do that all the time.
Yeah, like that's labor? Question mark? Like, like it's certainly doing something, and it's certainly like changing like the kind of nature of this object from like a transmission vessel for seeds to like a piece of food.
Yeah.
But is it labor? Does that thing acquire value? I don't know if it does. Like, it's certainly
The blackberries would, I guess. But here's an example that's more relevant to political economy. What about fucking land with oil in it? Uncultivated land that's full of oil. Obviously, it's full of value, even though no human labor is objectified in it. But, I mean, I guess you do have to do some amount of work to get that oil out.
Yeah.
But this is one of the reasons I hate the use of the word value, because it becomes so confusing, because uncultivated land obviously has use value. It just doesn't have labor value, which to him is exchange value, because it hasn't because nothing on the uncultivated land has been turned into a commodity.
You could also make the argument that this isn't even all that relevant anymore, because where is there uncultivated land that is not
rented?
That isn't what?
Rented.
That isn't rented or surveyed. Like, surveying a plot of land is, in the Marxian sense, like putting labor into it, because now you've like created boundaries on what this land is.
I don't even know if it would be, though, because I would think they would call that unproductive labor.
Which is another like very bizarre like formulation. Like,
yeah, because it's not. If you survey land, you don't turn it into a commodity by like the traditional sense. You're just drawing up a map of it essentially, and like telling someone else what is there.
You're, dare I say, making it legible.
Yeah. And then like, I mean, you can. This happens all the fucking time in the U.S. I guess only in the U.S., but like uncultivated land, supposedly, you know, we can have our issues with that term, but like, can be sold to natural gas companies because it's full of natural gas. They didn't do any work to it to make it saleable. It's just like the knowledge that there is natural gas under that land makes it valuable.
Right.
It doesn't matter if there's any human labor applied to it.
And there's also the whole like Ammon Bundy situation, which they were using federal land to graze their cattle on, which like, is that cultivating that land?
Is that human labor?
Yeah, is that human labor? Like,
it's bovine labor.
One, you can move the cattle. Like,
yeah.
And in fact, the cattle move themselves. So, like, and the whole standoff there was, like, them claiming that this was their land because they've grazed their cattle on it, and the federal government going, no, we own it.
Or, like, here's an example that we've talked about on the show in the past. Bird shit, guano. Extremely valuable fertilizer that created the agricultural revolution of the like 18th and 19th century
Yep.
like made everything into intensive agriculture. Obviously, it's not human labor that makes that valuable. It's the bird labor of shitting on an island.
Right.
The only human labor that's involved is like, I guess, the literal process of turning it into a commodity, where they cut it up and transport it somewhere.
Right.
But that's not where the value comes from.
Right. Because there were practically fucking wars fought over that shit.
Yeah.
Literally fought over that shit.
All right. Okay. So the last passage I have from here, I think supports my case again. This is the longest one. So, like the relative form of value in general, price expresses the value of a commodity. So that's just straight up saying price expresses the value of a commodity. In parentheses, for instance, a ton of iron. By asserting that a given quantity of the equivalent, for instance, an ounce of gold, is directly exchangeable with iron, but it by no means asserts the converse, that iron is directly exchangeable with gold. In order, therefore, that a commodity may in practice operate effectively as exchange value, it must divest itself of its natural physical body and become transformed from merely imaginary into real gold. I don't really understand that very well. To establish a price, it is sufficient for it to be equated with gold in the imagination. So I think that is like him allowing for the existence of fiat. The equated with gold in the imagination.
Yeah.
Part.
Or it's just kind of acknowledging that, like, gold is serving as a stand-in for, like, some later... So, like, this might be, like, brushing up against another theory of money, but it's like money is an intermediary exchange medium.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I use money to, and let's say we're using an actual, like, commodity backed money. I use money to buy flour in order to make a pie. Right. So, like, the flour being turned into the pie. I don't. They're this. Or
I think you're talking about the stuff that he talks about in the next chapter, which is like supposedly people ordinarily can like sell commodities for money in order to buy other commodities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's what he's what he's kind of like.
Yeah, that probably is, because that's what he goes into after this chapter, or after this section, rather.
Yeah. Because now because we operate with a fiat currency, and because gold has uses beyond just like vanity shit.
Okay. I see what he's saying here. Okay, so he's saying to price an item, all you have to do is imagine the equivalent amount of gold, because the next sentence is, but to enable it to render its owner the service of a universal equivalent, it must actually be replaced by gold.
Okay.
So he's saying that you can, like, you could, like, price something in terms of tons of iron, but because people don't actually trade using iron, it doesn't actually work as a money. I think that's what he's saying. Okay, so he continues, if the owners of the iron were to go to the owner of some other earthly commodity and were to refer to him to the price of iron as proof it was already money, his answer would be the terrestrial equivalent of the answer given by St. Peter in heaven to Dante when the latter recited the creed. And then I have in brackets, blah, 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 reference to something other than anime or The Sopranos, who cares? And then he finishes out here. The price form implies both the exchangeability of commodities for money and the necessity of exchanges. On the other hand, gold serves as an ideal measure of value only because it has already established itself as the money commodity in the process of exchange. Hard cash lurks within the ideal measure of value. So, yeah, that's all I have for section 1. And I don't know, other than that one argument against it, I really think that I'm right, that value is supposed to be price.
Right.
Like labor theory of value is supposed to be a theory of how prices form.
Right. And it fails to do that.
Yeah. Well, we ran a little bit long. I mean, we are going to cut some stuff out because we took a break and such, but yeah, I think we covered it so far for this episode. I'm hoping that we can continue doing episodes like this. So whenever you read, sufficient amount of capitalist power, then we can come back and talk about, that and capital.
Yeah, where you are in capital.
So Corey, thank you for joining me. I had a lot of fun talking to you about this stuff.
I enjoyed myself.
Do you have anything to plug?
Maybe that answers the question. No. If you want to follow me on Twitter, my Twitter account is F_A_R_T_S at farts. But there is another at farts, but they don't have the underscores.
Yeah, make sure you have the underscores. All right. Well, yeah, thanks a lot for coming on. Thanks everyone for listening. Sorry I haven't been doing episodes. I've been very depressed since quarantine started and made the mistake of trying to do current events episodes, which I think those are our weakest episodes, and I should just like not try to do those anymore. Because I just don't pay as much attention to that shit as other people, except for like stuff that's not related to the podcast. But anyway, so yeah, we will hopefully be doing more of these. Thank you for listening. We're going to resume the last little bit of Mecha Madness soon. We're going to do a Die Buster episode, and we're going to do like a wrap-up show to talk about like giant robot anime in general. And later, we are going to be doing a mini-series on isekai anime. So I've started watching all of the shows that I need to watch for that, and look forward to it. I will be hopefully coming up with a cutesy title for it. I'm thinking Isekai July, but July's a long way away, so I don't know. Actually, it's not that far away anymore, is it?
Yeah,
maybe I will do that.
Beginning of May.
Yeah, let's just say it's Isekai July. Okay. Thanks for listening. Bye.